A stranger sits down across from you on a crowded train. You have not heard their voice. You do not know their name. You will never see them again after this ride ends. And yet, somewhere behind your eyes, a verdict has already landed. Safe or not safe. Warm or cold. You feel it before you can explain it. The way you'd feel a hand on your shoulder before you turned around to see whose it was. So who decided that? Because it wasn't you. Not really. Here is what your mind will tell you happened. It will say it looked at the stranger's face and read something true about them. Character, intention, a little window into who they are. But that is not what happened at all. What happened is stranger and colder and far more interesting. In a lab at Princeton, 2 psychologists wanted to find out exactly how fast a face gets judged, not how accurately, how fast. So Janine Willis and Alexander Todorov flashed pictures of unfamiliar faces at volunteers for 1/10 of a second. That's it. Barely enough time to register that a face was even there, let alone study it. Then they asked one question. Do you trust this person? You'd expect people to hesitate, to ask for more time. They didn't. The answers came instantly. And here's the part that should unsettle you a little. When a second group got all the time they wanted, staring at the same faces for as long as they liked, their careful, considered answers barely moved. More time didn't change the verdict. It only made people more confident in a verdict their brain had already reached before they'd even finished blinking. Which means the decision was never really yours to slow down. Everything that happens after that first 1/10 of a second is just your mind performing a trial it has already closed. So what is it actually looking at? Todorov spent years building digital models of the human face, morphing thousands of tiny variations to isolate exactly which features tip a stranger toward trustworthy or threatening. And the pattern he found was almost embarrassingly small. Faces that curve slightly upward at rest, with raised inner brows and softer, broader cheekbones, read as safe. Faces that angle downward, with a tighter mouth and lower brow, read as dangerous. The difference between the two, measured in actual bone and muscle, is a few millimeters. Less than the width of a coin. But your brain treats those millimeters like a headline. And here's the twist inside the twist. That map has almost nothing to do with who the person actually is. A face that rests in a downward curve is not an angry face. It is just a face. It is architecture, not character. The same way a house with narrow windows isn't secretly hostile. Some people were simply born with features that echo a smile. Others were born with features that echo a scowl, and your ancient, unblinking wiring cannot tell the difference between an expression and a coincidence. You are not reading emotion off that stranger. You are reading geometry and mistaking it for a soul. But why would evolution build something this careless? Picture the tree line at the edge of an open plain tens of thousands of years ago. A figure steps out of the shadow toward your small group. You have seconds, maybe less. Hesitate, and a friend walks away insulted. Hesitate the other way, and you don't walk away at all. In that world, a fast guess that's sometimes wrong beats a perfect answer that arrives too late. The humans who paused to gather more evidence were, quite often, not the ones who lived long enough to become your ancestors. The ones who flinched first did, so your brain built a shortcut, and it built it deep. The part running that shortcut is the amygdala, a small almond-shaped cluster tucked near the center of your brain that acts as an early threat detector, faster than the thinking part of you could ever hope to be. It gets a rough sketch of a face before your conscious mind has finished loading the picture. It rings the alarm, or it stays quiet, and only afterward does the slow, reasonable version of you wake up and start writing the explanation. A researcher named Jonathan Freeman made this almost impossible to argue with. He showed people faces so quickly they never consciously registered seeing anything at all. And even then, even while volunteers swore the screen had been blank, their amygdala responded. It sorted trustworthy from untrustworthy in total darkness without asking permission from the part of them that calls itself I, which raises an uncomfortable question. If you never chose it, whose judgment is it? It isn't a judgment. It's a reflex dressed up in a judgment's clothes, and like any reflex, it fires whether the moment deserves it or not. On the ancient plane, a stranger's face was often the only information you had. Today, that same lightning verdict runs quietly through job interviews, courtrooms, and the half second before a voter picks a name on a ballot. Alexander Todorov later showed people photographs of political candidates for exactly 1 second. No names, no policies, just faces. Then he asked which one looked more competent. That snap impression predicted the actual winners of real elections at a rate far better than chance. People believed they were voting on ideas. Something underneath them was voting on cheekbones. And it doesn't stop at ballots. Nicholas Rule, who has spent years studying first impressions, has shown that people extract enormous amounts of meaning, real and imagined, from a single glance at a stranger. Faces that happen to read as less trustworthy have been tied to harsher outcomes in courtrooms, even when the actual facts of the case line up exactly the same. A resting expression, an accident of muscle and bone, can quietly bend the shape of someone's life. So here you are, walking through a world built to be judged in an instant, carrying a machine that answers before you're allowed to think. You cannot switch it off. That first flicker of trust or fear will keep arriving uninvited for the rest of your life. But there is a gap, a small one, the space between the flinch and the decision that follows it. And in that gap, you get to ask the only question that actually matters. Am I reading a person, or am I reading a coincidence of geometry wearing their face? So the next time a stranger sits down across from you and that instant verdict arrives, safe or not safe, before either of you has said a single word, remember what it actually is. Not wisdom, not instinct. Just an old, fast shadow cast by a brain still bracing for a tree line that hasn't existed in 10,000 years. You still won't be able to stop the feeling, but now you know whose it really was. And it wasn't quite yours.